Okay, a question that we get, one of the ones that came in recently was changing behavior. Should I reinforce this or what should I do? And we're going to talk about that coming up. Okay, so changing behavior when my dog is on odor, what should I do? Should I reinforce this? Should I not reinforce that? There's various reasons why we do it. And there's also things to consider that if you are reinforcing change of behavior frequently, what might happen? So let's talk about some good things about it. So why we reinforce on a change of behavior sometimes might be the introduction of a new odor. The dog goes into it, we're going to do what's called pay on sniff or mark on sniff, depending on what you choose to do. So what we wanted the dog to understand is, hey, this odor is important and it's reinforcing. After we teach it, we then change the criteria to go into basically a duration type of behavior, trained final response, things of that nature that we're going to say, okay, we now taught you what it was. The change of behavior first coming into it is no longer allowed. You now need to go into whatever your response behavior is. So then that goes from there. So that's one way. We're going to do that for initially teaching an odor. We might simply reinforce for the change of behavior to that odor. Another thing that we're going to do when it comes to that is inaccessible hides. Inaccessible hides are ones where the dog can't get to. It's either too high or too deep. So the dog is showing some great change in behavior, but we don't want them to get frustrated. So we will reward or use a condition reinforcer or a marker to let the dog know that, hey, you're right. That's right where it's at, even though you can't get to it like you normally do when it's within an inch or two of your nose. So we will reinforce the dog, giving that change of behavior, letting us know that they can find odor, but they just can't get to it. And by doing that, we reduce the ability or reduce frustration or frustrating type behaviors such as dogs barking, scratching, aggression, or just leaving odor altogether. We don't want that to happen either. So inaccessible is another one where reinforcement happens for a change in behavior. Another would be context change. It's the first time we're going into this area. This area is brand new to the dog. So instead of waiting for a full trained final response, we might just simply reinforce that dog acknowledging the odor in that environment, and then the very next repetition or repetition or two later, we will require that full final response and duration of that odor. But to lower that criteria, because the environment's new or the environment might be stressful for some dogs, we are going to possibly reinforce for that change of behavior so that way we don't have any negative by waiting too long, expecting the dog to do something else. Another one that is common in the sport world is they want to get through their search as quick as possible, because if they find the odors as fast as they can, that search time, that is really good because they did it, let's just say 2 minutes, they searched the area, they found all the hides in 2 minutes, they weren't waiting for that final response. So they quickly marked or rewarded that change of behavior, called that alert, and that allows them to get through a search area much faster and score the points for them in the competition mode. There's now going to go into the downside of that, and I'll continue on with that specific point. So in the sport community, there's various trainers out there who are really good at, hey, look, I can search this area very quickly. I am just going to reward my dog on the change of behavior. They know their dogs very well. So others may try to imitate this or follow that system. And what happens is, in training, you know the answer. And you see that change of behavior, you reinforce that. But on trial, where there's now distractors or other things or your own nerves at play, what starts to happen is now you're not sure and you're not reinforcing as quick as you normally do, and then the dog leaves. So training, that quick reinforcement when you knew the answer didn't translate really well to the competition mode. And when you started that second guessing, the dog went, well, I didn't get reinforcement, and moves on. Typical thing is in the sport world is go find another. And the dog went, well, I got no reinforcement, I move on. So now the handler is scratching their head going, oh, I don't know. Maybe that is something there. Maybe it's not. Maybe it's something of interest. I don't know. I'm confused. So that ambiguity there can be part of the problem. Another one is when we are reinforcing on a change of behavior only, sometimes it's not super clear to the dog what the reinforcement was for. Was it for the odor or was it for whatever might be salient in that area? So we need to kind of have it set up that if we're going to do some type of reinforcement for a change of behavior, we have the conditions set up in our benefit so that way the dog knows that reinforcement is that change of behavior in relation to that target odor. Another one is the downside. Well, change of behavior can look like interest in whatever something has got the dog's attention in the search area. Bill Gaskins and I did a webinar on is this interest or is this alert, and I'll link that in the show notes below. It's on fordcanine.com. You guys can go check it out if you haven't. And we go into great detail of how important it is for you to know what your dog's behavior is when it is, smelling something of interest. Like, what does it do when it smells other dog smells? What does it do when it smells food? What does it do when it smells the target odor? And how are these behaviors different? So that way you can actually tell that minute difference between interest and being on target odor. But what happens is the downside, like I was saying, is when there's a lot of reinforcement for just change of behavior, sometimes for some people, this looks very similar to interest, and that confusion can cause some problems when it goes to training. Another one is the downside being it might ruin or degrade that nice trained final response you had, whatever it is. It could be a sit, could be a focused behavior, could be laying down, could be going to odor looking at you. If you reinforce change of behavior too frequently, again, I'm going to kind of put this in a competition mode or certification mode for professional handlers. If you're reinforcing too quickly and this happens, again, at a higher rate, well, then you're not requiring your indication. So thus the indication behavior starts to diminish and the dog thinks it only needs the the change of behavior to get reinforcement. So we want to be clear. We don't want to fill those two jars of sand, change of behavior and indication, too much on each side of the equation. You got to try to find what's the happy medium for that particular dog. Not all dogs are going to be equal on this. So it's very important that we make sure we understand what we're reinforcing for and why. And then we also lose duration when it comes to if we're only reinforcing change of behavior. When we reinforce change of behavior, those are quick behaviors. And then when we want the dog to stay at an odor, especially when something might come up where we need to know, is the dog really on odor or is it not? And if we had a criteria where we are reinforcing very quickly for small changes of behavior, we are definitely going to potentially look at degrading duration, specifically duration to indication. And then, like I kind of mentioned, your ability to read your dog. Are you able to clearly read your dog when it's on odor change of behavior versus change of behavior to something else? And then we have to, of course, maintain our criteria. Not maintaining the criteria or constantly having different things we're reinforcing for some dogs, this can become more confusing. And those that have attended my cognition classes where we talk about memory and inference, we might be messing with what is this dog using to solve the problem. And if we are not clear about what we are reinforcing for, if it's not clear to the dog, what do you think our translation of what we see is going to be? We're not going to know. So our confusion turns into the dog's confusion, which means we're not clear. So my advice is go into your training with a plan, know what you're doing, and know what you're going to reinforce for. Be very clear about that. The more we are clear about what we require, it's going to be better for the dog, which means if that dog tells us things more clearly, we feel more the ability to trust the dog of what the information is. So there's a lot of things at play here. There's a lot of reasons. There'll be lots of comments down below, I'm sure. So tell me what you think in those comments. Please like and subscribe, and I hope you guys can use this information to your benefit. Keep those questions coming, and I'll talk to you guys in the next one.